Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Anderson?
Present.
Assemblywoman Black? Assemblywoman Brown May?
Here.
Assemblywoman Carlton?
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen?
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison?
Present.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez?
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson?
Here.
Assemblywoman Martinez?
Present.
Assemblywoman Titus? Assemblyman Wheeler?
Here.
Chair Watts?
Thank you, and I am here. Please mark Assemblywoman Black and Assemblywoman Titus present as they arrive. I know that they're in Health and Human Services Committee right now, and we'll try and keep an eye out for them and make the Secretary aware once they are present. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a few quick housekeeping announcements as usual. Members, please make sure to mute yourselves when you're not speaking to minimize background noise. For members of the public, you can participate in our meetings in a variety of ways. Information on how to do so can be found on every meeting agenda for this committee, as well as on the help page at the Nevada Legislature's website. In order to provide testimony or public comment, participants must sign up on the legislative website. You can also provide written comments emailed to our committee email address before, during, or up to 48 hours after the meeting, and you can find that on our agendas or website. Committee exhibits or amendments must be submitted electronically in PDF form to our committee manager no later than 4 p.m. the day prior to the meeting. Any amendments must include bill number, statement of intent, and contact information. All uploaded exhibits can be found on our website. And when we do go to testimony and public comment, we ask that speakers limit their remarks to 2 minutes so that we can accommodate everyone and get through the agenda in a timely manner. With that, committee, I believe we can go on to our business. We will we'll hold on the work session right now, I think, see if we can get all of our members here at once. And we'll go on to the bill presentations. I think what we'll do is take things out of order. We're going to do Assembly Bill 433. Then after that, we'll see where things are at. We may go into work session then. So we'll just play it by ear. So with that, I'm going to open the hearing on Assembly Bill 433, which revises provisions relating to the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council. I believe we have Mr. Lawrence with the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Please go ahead and introduce yourself for the record. You can proceed whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Watts and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Kelly McGowan, Program Manager for the Sagebrush Ecosystem Program within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And yes, Jim Lawrence was hoping to be here to provide this testimony, but he's in a concurrent session or meeting right now providing some testimony. So I'm sure if he can, he'll join us if he's able. I appreciate the opportunity to present testify in support of Assembly Bill 433. Assembly Bill 433 provides authority for the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council to establish by regulation a reasonable fee for administrative work associated with a conservation credit system. AB 433 further provides that any monies collected be deposited in the account to restore the sagebrush ecosystem, or work to be carried out to benefit the sagebrush ecosystem. Of course, any regulations approved by the council will require approval of the Legislative Commission. As background, in 2014, the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council developed and adopted a compensatory mitigation tool called the Conservation Credit System, or CCS, as required by Nevada statutes. More recently, the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council adopted regulations requiring the use of the CCS to mitigate for planned anthropogenic disturbances on public lands. Generally speaking, the credit system is a habitat exchange in which landowners voluntarily carry out habitat protection and improvement projects to offset anthropogenic disturbances in sage-grouse habitats. A foundation of the CCS is a habitat quantification tool, which is a model used to quantify the site-specific functional benefit of the habitat for greater sage-grouse. This quantification tool quantifies the number of credits associated with a project, allowing the landowner to then sell the credits to an entity that needs to mitigate for disturbances that they have created within the sage-grouse habitat. Conversely, when a development project such as oil, gas, geothermal, and mining is proposed in greater sage-grouse habitat, the same habitat quantification tool can be used to quantify the number of debits associated with the habitat disturbance. An equal amount of credits must be purchased with management agreements in place prior to the development project moving forward. The Sagebrush Ecosystem Program is responsible for certifying that the debit and credit calculations are accurate and that the transfer of credits has occurred with all the required financial assurances and monitoring plans in place. This certification is required by Nevada Administrative Code, Chapter 232, and by federal land managers prior to final permitting. During the first few years of the program, the Sagebrush Ecosystem Technical Team, an interagency team consisting of 5 individuals, provided much of the necessary GIS, as Geographical Information System analysis, and model work associated with the habitat quantification tool without limitation on the number of scenarios that were to be analyzed. The team provides annual trainings to consultants and verifiers. Currently, there are over 50 individuals that have been trained and certified to use the CCS. However, many project applicants still go directly to the team, asking for the analysis of multiple scenarios during their environmental review process, resulting in an increased workload. As such, the team has contemplated implementing a reasonable fee in 2 areas. The first would be a small fee for the required certification work done by the team to certify that the amount of credits and debits were calculated correctly and can be used in the environmental documents. The second fee would be optional, allowing individuals that prefer to have the team run the various development proposals as opposed to using a consultant or verifier. These are the initial thoughts and ideas regarding a structure, but of course, final recommendations would be developed through the regulatory process, including public workshops, council meetings, and hearings. Lastly, I wish to point out that the legislation requires that any fees collected be deposited into the account to restore the sagebrush ecosystem. This is important. The CCS does an outstanding job of providing mitigation framework for proposed disturbances. However, much of the threats to the sagebrush ecosystem are the result of wildfire, invasive species, as well as increased horse, burrow, and raven populations. Monies deposited in this account can fund necessary scientific research, as well as habitat rehabilitation and improvement work. This concludes my testimony. I thank you for your time this afternoon, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. I'd like to note that Assemblywoman Titus is present, and we'll start off questions with the Assemblywoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and especially thank you for noting that the biggest impact to the sagebrush ecosystem is forest fires, horses, burros, and ravens. So my question is, how much of this credit system has already been accessed? We've heard about this now multiple sessions. Conceptually, it started back when we were first mitigating the impact and trying to avoid sage grouse going on the endangered species list, and this is one of the solutions. And so we already have this program without fees because this establishes new fees. Has it been successful?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. So that can be a challenging question to answer. We feel that the program, the mitigation has been successful in that the system is set up to compensate for disturbances. And for those, since the regulation has been passed and now it's required to be used, those operating within sage grouse habitat have mitigated and used the CCS for that purpose. And so I would say yes, to this point, the system has been successful.
Do we have a follow-up question on that, Mr. Chair, please?
Go ahead.
Do we have an acreage? Do we have a actual impact on how much acreage has been involved in that then, and you're successful in the success of this?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. I don't have that those numbers in front of me right now, but I'd certainly be happy to provide those to you following this meeting. But it's in the tens of thousands of acres that have been protected to date.
Because of this previous legislation, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the questions, and thank you, sir, for the answers.
Thank you. We'll go on to Assemblywoman Carlton next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And as has become the norm in this session, I've never seen it in other sessions the way it is this session, but 2/3 bills seem to have a target on them. So I think it's probably good to have a conversation about the purpose behind these fees right now. In the past, I believe they were just budgeted through the account, but now we're talking about a fee. So if this fee does not come to fruition, how will your work get done? How have you paid for it before? And what options are we going to have? Because these types of bills have real issues at this time. I'm not hearing anything.
Kelly McGowan, for the record, thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Carlton. So how we've operated to date has been primarily within our state appropriated general fund budget. And we would have to continue to operate that way. We do rely heavily on other state agency partners and federal partners to help develop some of the science, but on the side of the mitigation and operating the mitigation, we would have to find a way, unfortunately, to continue to work within the confines of our existing budget.
About how much does this cost you guys at Evaluatium? And I hate to go down the Ways and Means road, Mr. Chairman, but it seems as though with the perspective on 2/3 bills that we're facing over the next 40 some days, I want to know if there's options and what those costs might be, because I consider this very important work that I don't want to see sidelined because of a philosophical opposition to a 2/3 bill. So if I could just get that information.
Thank you, and I will allow that. I know it is, this is a tight line between a policy and a fiscal matter, but essentially the thrust of this bill is enabling a revenue mechanism. So if the department can address the Assemblywoman's question, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. This is Kelly McGowan for the record. Of course, our budget composes of many parts. And so I can give you a ballpark that generally it's around $500,000 and annually to operate our program.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for the latitude. I've been around long enough to remember the conversations with former Assemblyman Bob Zine about this. And when we look at all the good work that has been done, and we know times are tight, and the division is being responsible and asking for a fee to help mitigate some of the general fund dollars, but we also know the other side of that equation. So I just wanted to make sure that we had that on the record, and we can have future conversations to make sure that the good work still gets done.
Thank you. I believe we have a question from Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Lawrence. It's Mr. Lawrence, right? I'm sorry, I was having trouble hearing a little bit, so I hope I got your name right. Can you give the program's been in existence, but for those who are new, could you maybe give an example, a real life example of some of the work, or maybe a project, or so that we can have a better understanding?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Hanson. Kelly McGowan for the record. So I guess one of the examples would be, so right now, all of the credit developers within the system, and they're the people providing, improving habitat, are private landowners, mostly farmers and ranchers with fairly large land holdings within sage grouse habitat. So we've worked with them and pointed, after we run the HQT, it indicates where areas maybe on their property conservation can be done to increase or improve upon the habitat. And so they implement those. They have a robust annual monitoring plan that they have to send to us annually. Every 15 years, they do full re-verification of their project to see if it's still holding the values that were measured to begin with. And then ultimately, those credit projects are put on the open market for sale to those that need to purchase them. And so we have, as I stated earlier, exploration, mining, geothermal, electric transmission, power lines, and a number of others that have reached out. And we, to date, I believe, had 16 transactions within our program to offset these disturbances. So I think it's beneficial to our private landowners. And it's of course beneficial to the sage grouse. Some of these private lands are the most productive lands in the state. Many of them contain limited water resources and very productive habitats. So I think it's been very productive for the grouse, for the private landowners. And not to say that it's only limited to private landowners. There is an opportunity for entities to create credits on public land as well, as I mentioned, fire and invasives and other issues that occur or that can occur on public land are also in great need of conservation.
Thank you for that, Mr. McGowan. I'm so sorry about that. I was looking at the wrong name on my. So thank you for giving that overview. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Hanson. I believe we have a question from Assemblywoman Anderson.
and thank you, Mr. McGowan, for stepping in and presenting the bill so quickly and succinctly. My question has to do with section, I believe it's 7E. It's on page 4. It's the new language of between lines 10 through 14. So this is my first time reading information such as this. So I'm just wanting to make sure that I understand the council correctly. And I recognize that in section 2, there are members that are appointed. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that the regulations that are being adopted would come from these volunteer members who are representing these areas that are listed in section 2. But I just wanted to double check that and make sure that that was accurate information. And I'm so sorry, I think you're still on mute.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson. I appreciate the question. Kelly McGowan for the record. Yes, the fees would be established through the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council, which is a governor appointed body that we serve as staff to, if that was your question.
So just to verify, these members are volunteers that are representing the different areas that are mentioned in section 2A. These are the voting members who accept it, and then there are some other members that are non-voting members.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? Seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation. With that, we'll go to testimony on this bill. As a reminder, in order to provide testimony, you must register on the legislative website where you'll be given the information to dial in. We ask that you limit your comments to 2 minutes and clearly state and spell your name at the beginning before starting your testimony. With that, we'll open with testimony in support of Assembly Bill 433.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on Assembly Bill 433, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits 155, please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record, and you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI-CABRERA, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League here in support of AB 433. Conservation of the sagebrush ecosystem is vital to Nevada's wildlife, watershed health, biodiversity, and outdoor recreation economy. Sagebrush habitats cover around 50% of our state, support over 360 species, and provide recreational and economic opportunities. However, the sagebrush ecosystem is one of the most imperiled in the United States. Greater than 50% of all historic sagebrush habitats have been lost from threats such as wildfire, invasive species, climate change, and development. These threats degrade, convert, and fragment sagebrush habitats. Restoration and mitigation actions that preserve the integrity and connectivity of the sagebrush ecosystem are critical. This bill will increase revenue to mitigate damage to these very special spaces, and we urge the committee's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cabrera. We'll go on to the next caller in support.
Chair, it seems that there are no more callers in support at this time.
All right, thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 433.
To testify in opposition on AB 433, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, it seems that there are no callers in opposition at this time.
All right, thank you. With that, we'll go to testimony in the neutral position on this bill.
Chair, I apologize. I believe that there is actually one caller in opposition.
That's fine. Go ahead and get them queued up.
Caller with the last three digits 092. Please solely state and spell your name for the record, and you may begin.
Hi, this is Tiffany East, Tiffany-East. And I was actually trying to testify in support, but the system wouldn't allow me in. So may I proceed in support?
Yes, you may. We have had some technical difficulties with people being able to get in time, so it's no problem at all. Please proceed, please.
Thank you, Chairman Watson. Good afternoon, Assemblymen and women. For the record, my name is Tiffany East, and I'm the chairwoman of the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners. The Legislative Committee of the Commission voted to support AB 433, and I'll keep this brief. Mitigation efforts to protect, enhance, or restore sagebrush ecosystems provides a firewall for sage-grouse and other sagebrush obligates, such as mule deer. This ecosystem is critical to their survival. Many of the programs under the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council complements the work of NDOW and the Wildlife Commission to provide and protect habitat for Nevada's wildlife. We encourage you to support AB 433. Thank you so much for your consideration and your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Chair East. All right. With that, let's see if we have anyone wishing to testify neutral on Assembly Bill 433.
To testify in neutral on AB 433, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, it seems that there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. And I believe we have Mr. Tibbetts on the Zoom who would like to provide testimony in the neutral position. Mr. Tibbetts, go ahead and proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Jake Tibbetts, JAKETIBBITTS. And I'm the Natural Resources Manager for Eureka County, speaking on behalf of Eureka County. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for allowing Eureka County to provide some insights on AB 433 in the neutral position. The continued dialogue regarding the Sagebrush Ecosystem Program and its lack of capacity and bandwidth can only be rectified with funding. Being statutorily authorized to manage the sagebrush ecosystem of Nevada by the legislature, the program needs to meet its obligations, needs funding to meet its obligations and to be successful. It's important to understand that the program, the Sagebrush Ecosystem Council, the Sagebrush Ecosystem Technical Team are not only focused on sage-grouse conservation. The record is clear that the legislature intended these entities to be focused on the entire sagebrush ecosystem, even if the focus to date has been on sage-grouse. The enabling language in AB 433 may assist with administration of some programs, such as the Conservation Credit System. And we note that the Conservation Credit System was the first of its kind in the Western U.S. Its success has continued as a vehicle for real progress on sage-grouse conservation. However, if the legislature is serious about supporting the needed work of the program for sage-grouse and the entire sagebrush ecosystem, we encourage long-term sustainable funding that can't just be met by fee authority. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Tibbetts. And I believe we had a question from Assemblywoman Carlton for you.
And thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure if Mr. Tibbetts is the correct person to ask, but so in conversations about this bill with the folks that you represent, was there an issue with the fee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Assemblywoman Carlton, for the question. So yeah, I'm representing the Eureka County Commissioners, and they don't have consensus on the issue related to fees. So, you know, I live in a very conservative area, and there's always a concern about certain fees and things like that. So The board did we did want to come in neutral on this, really don't take a position one way or the other on the fee. Our point was just to point out that, fee authority isn't going to get us where we need to get on sage grouse or even sagebrush conservation. And it is going to continue to take legislative appropriations beyond just fee authority. And that was the point we wanted to bring forward. Thanks.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I needed some clarification on that because I just wanted to make sure that we had a complete record. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Tibbetts. I think you make the point clear that additional substantial investment is needed and the revenue to support that has to come from somewhere. Do we have anyone else wishing to testify in neutral position on Zoom that I may have missed? All right, seeing none, we'll turn it back over to Mr. Gowan for any closing remarks he would like to make.
Thank you, Chair Watts and members of the committee. Kelly McGowan again for the record. I just want to say thank you again for this opportunity to be able to present this bill to you. And I would just like to reiterate that the need is great. The sage grouse habitat, which isn't all of the sagebrush ecosystem, but where sage grouse tend to exist and thrive, it alone is 23 million acres of land. And so we have significant issues that people have identified that you've probably heard about in the news: fire and invasives, common raven populations exploding, and other items. And it goes well beyond the conservation credit system and our ability to mitigate. It requires the science and the knowledge to be able to pinpoint efforts so that we no longer continue to shotgun our approach. Time is of the essence, and this funding would help us begin to expand beyond just the nature of mitigating for disturbances within sage grouse habitat. And I thank you again.
Thank you. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 433. And I've heard that we've got the Health and Human Services Committee wrapping up. So I think now is an appropriate time to go into our work session. We have a few bills on our work session agenda today. I think we will begin with Assembly Bill 85, which revises provisions relating to noxious weeds. As a reminder, during our work session, we do not typically take testimony. However, we may call upon bill sponsors or others to clarify questions that arise. So with that, we'll begin with our work session on Assembly Bill 85. Mr. Stinisbeck, our policy analyst, will walk us through the work session documents. Mr. Stinisbeck, please proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Jan Stinisbeck with the Legislative Council Bureau. As non-partisan Senate staff, can I advocate for or against any measure comes before this committee? With that, Assembly Bill 85 was heard in this committee on March 24th, and it removes from statute a provision that prohibits the state quarantine officer from designating a weed as noxious if the weed is so well established in the state that its control has been judged to be impractical. With this prohibition removed, the state quarantine officer may declare by regulation any weed to be noxious. There was one amendment proposed by former Senator Heidi Swank and River County, and this amendment would authorize the state quarantine officer to limit the geographic areas in which a weed is classified as noxious, so that the state quarantine officer could designate a weed as noxious for a certain geographic area and not have to have such a designation applied to an entire state. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I wasn't on mute. Thank you, Mr. Stinisbeck. We have Mr. Tibbetts and Assemblywoman Swank joining us for any questions that members may have. So And we have one from Assemblywoman Hanson. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I know we mentioned the amendment, which was important to vote, but I've not seen it. Is it just so conceptual? Is it in print? I checked about an hour before I got on, but I saw it in the work session document mentioned, but I'm not seeing it.
Thank you for that question, Assemblywoman Hanson. It is a conceptual amendment. So no mock-up has been provided. All we have is the conceptual description laid out in the work session document. Are there any further questions about the conceptual amendment? All right, seeing none, I would accept a motion to amend and do pass AB 85.
Move to amend and do pass. Cohen?
I'll second.
Thank you. I have a motion from Vice Chair Cohen, and I have a second from Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Is there any discussion on the motion? Yes, go ahead, Assemblywoman Hanson.
I'm going to, I love the amendment. I'm going to be no until I get it, and I'll change by floor. Just for now, no until I have my hands on it, and I've got some comfort for some of my constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Other discussion? Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the potential amendment. We need to see it. We'll need, once we see that amendment, to see where the Farm Bureau is. I think we need to get this under control. I think I worked with this Assemblywoman Swank. I know she's on the phone, and providing that amendment clarifies what the Farm Bureau and other folks are concerned about. I could be supportive of this. Until I see the amendment, I'm going to be a no.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Go ahead, Assemblywoman Carlton.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just, for the committee's sake, at this time of session, we typically don't do mock-ups. We do things this way in this print, and this work session document is actually the legislative intent on what we're doing. Legal does not do mock-ups any longer at this time because they're still drafting bills, and especially budget bills and budget amendments. So I just wanted to make it clear that almost every bill that we're going to see between now and Friday is not going to have a mock-up.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Carlton. As someone working on many amendments in conceptual form myself, yes, we are going to see a lot more that is provided in conceptual form, and the legal division's also doing quite a bit of work drafting the amendments that we have already approved for bills to this point. So thank you for that clarification. And I know that we're on the discussion for the motion, but would just like to note that Mr. Tibbetts is on and can speak to any of the additional conversations that led to the compromise on this bill. Assemblywoman Hanson, I'll give you a second.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate that. Maybe I'll ask Mr. Tibbetts a question, but I do understand during work session that this gets busy and things happen last. I just thought the amendment had been in the process for quite some time. So, Mr. Tibbetts, could you tell me maybe when Eureka County was working on an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Tibbetts. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, we've been working. I want to thank Dr. Swank. We had a few text exchanges, an email, and had a phone call or a Zoom meeting as well to talk over the amendment. So understanding LCB is busy and there's a lot going on that, it just is what it is at this point. Frankly, I would like to see the language in writing too, but understanding where we're at, I think the conceptual amendment that is in the work session does reflect the compromise that we've come together with Dr. Swank on. Recognizing that the state quarantine officer can limit noxious weed designations in certain geographic areas. And I'll also note that current statute and NRS 555.150 already addresses part of our concern that Eureka County brought forward at the hearing, is that through regulation or through the designation of noxious weeds, the state quarantine officer can already designate the manner which is required to manage any type of noxious weed. So we feel that that does outline the specific management control strategies that we had originally asked to be amended in. So I do think conceptually that this amendment, with the legislative intent, does get us to where we need to be, where the state quarantine officer could limit that rather than statewide to watersheds, certain geographic areas, or even a neighborhood if the state quarantine officer felt that it was necessary. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes. Assemblywoman Swink. Once an Assemblywoman, always an Assemblywoman. Please proceed.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment that this wasn't a compromise. Mr. Tippett's idea was a great idea. It improved the bill. We had a good meeting last week. It was on, I want to say on Friday, and then we sent off the change to LCB. But it's not a compromise. It's a better idea.
Thank you. And legal did receive this over the weekend. And while it may feel like it's later than Wednesday, it is Wednesday. So any other discussion on this motion? Seeing none, will the secretary please conduct a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black,
I need to clarify what bill we're voting on. I'm sorry, I entered mid-discussion.
We are on Assembly Bill 85.
No. Okay, no, thank you.
Assemblywoman Brown May,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton,
Yeah.
Assemblywoman Cohen,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison,
No.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson,
No.
Assemblywoman Martinez, Assemblywoman Titus,
No.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
No.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
All right, we've got a thumbs up.
Chair
We've got a
Watts.
yes from Martinez, and I am a yes. Thank you. The motion carries. And I will assign the floor statement to Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, I believe we can go on to Assembly Bill 148, which revises provisions governing mining. Mr. Stinisbeck, will you please lead us through the work session document for this bill?
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Jan Stinisbeck with the Research Division of LCB. Assembly Bill 148 was heard in this committee on March 17th, and it prohibits the issuance of an exploration or mining permit to any applicant who has defaulted on any obligation relating to reclamation, or if the application is a corporation or other business entity, if any of its listed principal officers has previously been listed as a principal officer of a corporation or business entity that has defaulted on any obligation relating to reclamation. The bill authorizes the issuance of such a permit if such a person pays the full amount of the defaulted obligation and demonstrates that the conditions that led to the default have been remedied and no longer exist. There's two amendment, one mock-up and one conceptual amendment that is in addition to the mock-up. They were proposed by Assemblywoman Peters, and the combined amendment then makes the following changes. It replaces the reference to principal officer with person who has a controlling interest in a corporation or other business entity, defines person who has a controlling interest to mean a person who owns or controls the majority of the voting stock or holds any other controlling interest directly or indirectly in a corporation or other business entity that gives the person the power to direct management or determine policy, or is a partner, director, trustee, or other principal officer of the corporation or business entity. It defines other principal officers to mean president, secretary, treasurer, or equivalent thereof, and that are chosen in such a manner, holds their office for such terms, and have such powers and duties as may be described by the bylaws or determined by the board of directors of the corporation or business entity. The amendment provides that the provision against being issued a permit applies to an applicant or person of a controlling interest as applicable who is not in good standing with the applicable federal agency governing the mining operation or in any state or territory of the United States. Provides when a permit may be issued to a person who was not in good standing but who performed certain remediation actions and changed the effective date upon passage and approval for the adoption of regulation and for carrying out any other preparatory task, and April 1st, 2022 for all other purposes.
Thank you, Mr. Stinisbeck. We do have the bill sponsor. Do we have any questions from members? Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a quick question to make sure I'm understanding correctly, Assemblymember Peters. When it comes to both the person with the controlling interest as well as the principal officer, this is being defined in the law, but then are there other areas that are being defined in regulations to avoid confusion that I think had been brought up during the hearing? I think you and I had tried to talk offline about it a little bit. So just wanted to get that verification.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson. Sarah Peters, for the record. Yes, these have been sticking points for a number of stakeholders, including the state agency who would promulgate these regulations. So we've been working closely together on trying to clarify in the statute as much as they need to be able to promulgate regulations to address these issues in the future. At this time, we feel like we're in a pretty good place, but I will continue to have conversations with them to make sure that we are meeting those needs of both the states and entities who would be regulated under this piece, so that there's clarity in the process.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Assemblywoman Hanson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Assemblymember Peters. My question is this idea of good standing, other states and with federal agencies. I'm trying to understand exactly, because different states are going to have different standards. So you could have a controlling interest that might pass a standard in one state, but maybe not in good standing in another state. So does it cancel it? It just seems very kind of convoluted, and I'm not sure how you navigate that.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Hanson. Sarah Peters, for the record. This is another place where we had obvious concerns about the language being maybe too broad. I really think that the state agency are the experts in this area, and the regulatory process, which is a public process that includes stakeholders and can go up to 18 months or so, is the place to kind of drill down what that looks like for these permits. I can tell you, having worked in regulatory permitting and compliance, that when you talk about good standing, that would be outside of any violation, right? And then once a permit is recognized as being, or a permittee is recognized as being in violation of their permit, they put together a plan with the regulatory agency typically. And once they have instituted that plan, right, and agreed upon that plan, then they are no longer outside of that good standing. So I think that there is some baseline there to develop the process of identifying good standing. Additionally, we did decide to put that artist on the permittee to an affidavit saying and committing that they are in good standing with their permits across the country. So I think that, you know, when you run a company, you get a notice when you're in violation of something, right? Whether in small business, it's like the tax authority violation, or maybe your parking lot needs to be cleaned up and it's an ordinance violation. You know those things, right? So I think that companies can identify when they're not in good standing with those permits, but also identify when they've met those regulatory compliance needs to get back into good standing and be out of violations.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Assemblywoman Titus?
Thank you. Assemblywoman Peters, during the hearing, we heard that NDEP was concerned that they may not be able to follow the regulations or enforce the regulations or proceed. There's some concerns there. Has that been resolved?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Titus. For the record, Sarah Peters. Yes, that was about really how to figure out whether a company and its controlling interests and principal officers were in good standing on their permits, and we resolved that by including the affidavit in the application process.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Ellison, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Ms. Peters, I got one. What happens if there's a dispute and a disagreement between one state to the other and they're trying to resolve it? Would this hold up any kind of permits in the state of Nevada for new application?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Allison. Sarah Peters, for the record, can you clarify what you mean by a dispute between states?
Well, let's say that I'm in Canada or somewhere and there's a disagreement between permits or cleanup or anything, and the mines are totally in disagreement. So by doing so, and say they're back in Nevada and they're going to apply for a permit, would that dispute between the two agencies create a problem to hold a permit back? You understand where I'm trying to come from? Because, you know, it seems like an agency can hold an application up.
Assemblywoman Peters, for the record, I think I'm tracking what you're saying. So what I'm hearing from you is you're concerned that if another state agency is holding up a permit in their state, that could influence the permit happening in Nevada.
Correct.
So thank you again, Sarah Peters, for the record. So the only case would be if the permit, and potentially this needs some better fleshing out for good standing and meeting those violation standards. But the intention here is to really capture those who are in existing violation of an agreed permit within another state or jurisdiction in the country, right? So just the application for a permit and disagreements in the application's validity for whatever state it is wouldn't have an impact on their ability to get a permit in the state of Nevada. It would only be in those cases in which they are violating an existing permitted project, right, which is a contractual agreement. A permit is that contractual agreement with the state obligating you to do certain functions as a part of your project. Only in those cases would it hold up this process until they were in good standing with those permits.
Thank you. I'd also just like to clarify that this measure would not apply to foreign nations in the Canadian example that you gave, Mr. Allison. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, I would accept a motion to amend and do pass Assembly Bill 148.
Move to amend and do pass, Cohen.
A second, Assemblywoman Carlton.
Thank you. I've got a motion from Vice Chair Cohen and a second from Assemblywoman Carlton. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, will the secretary please conduct the roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black?
No.
Assemblywoman Brown May?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton?
Yeah.
Assemblywoman Cohen?
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison?
No.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez? Assemblywoman Hanson,
No.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus,
No.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
No.
Chair Watts.
Yes. Thank you. That motion carries. I'll assign the floor statement to Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. With that, we will now go on to Assembly Bill 299, which makes various changes to wildlife. Mr. Stinisbeck, can you lead us through the work session document for Assembly Bill 299?
Thank you, Chair Watts. For the record, Jan Stinisbeck with the Researchers at LCB. Assembly Bill 299 was heard in this committee on March 31st. The bill provides that a salvageable animal accidentally killed as a result of a vehicle collision in the state may be salvaged and possessed if a salvage permit is obtained. It requires the driver or person who finds the salvageable animal to completely remove the carcass to ensure that the meat animal is only used for human consumption, and to deliver and surrender the head, hide, antlers, horns, or tusk of the animal to the Department of Wildlife within 5 business days after taking possession of the animal. The bill provides that a driver or person who salvage and takes possession of the carcass of a salvage animal does so at his or her own risk, and further provides that the state is not liable with respect to any use made of the carcass. The bill prohibits the salvage and taking possession of a salvageable animal from the reservation lands of any Indian tribe in the state. Lastly, the bill provides that a person who intentionally hits and renders a cripple or helpless or kills a salvageable animal shall be punished for category E felony and otherwise violates any provision of this bill is guilty of a misdemeanor. There are 2 amendments to this bill. The first was proposed by Assemblywoman Wilbur Axelrod, and during the bill hearing, it prohibits a person from attempting to salvage an animal outside of daylight hours without a peace officer and sufficient light present, limits salvage to highways with a maximum speed under 70 miles per hour, and prohibits salvage on interstate highways. And lastly, clarifies that a 24-hour rule for obtaining a salvage permit is only to be used if the animal is located in a rural area where access to NDOW to Department of Wildlife officials is not immediately available. The second proposed amendment was proposed by the Department of Wildlife and was submitted after the hearing. It provides that a salvage permit may only be issued by a law enforcement officer if the animal was killed or injured due to a vehicle collision, prohibits the issuance of a salvage permit for any animal that has a tracking collar, has a tag indicating that animal should not be consumed due to chemical immobilization, or has obvious signs of disease, provides that a salvage permit needs to stay with the carcass, and a complete copy of the permit for that animal has to be submitted to NDOW within 5 business days after taking possession of the carcass. Prohibits salvaging an animal from any residential restricted area, any wildlife management areas, public waste disposal facility, areas deemed by NDOW to contain diseased or contaminated animals, and private property without the permission of the owner. And lastly, requires the salvage permit to contain information regarding the species and sex of the animal, as well as by what method it was killed. Additionally, requires information of any individual who will be transporting or in possession of any portion of parts of the salvaged animal. And again, both proposed amendments, language of them in full are attached to this work session document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stinisbeck. And we also have the Department of Wildlife available to answer any questions that folks have about the latest amendment. With that, are there any questions?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Bilberry Axelrod was going to be tied up for any questions, so happy to take any that members might have, but also want to acknowledge the great conversation that we had with the Nevada Department of Wildlife to go over their concerns, and we appreciated their amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any additional discussion? All right. Hearing none, I would accept a motion to amend and do pass Assembly Bill 299.
Move to amend and do pass. Cohen.
Thank you. I've got a motion from Vice Chair Cohen, and I believe I have a second from Assemblyman Wheeler. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the secretary please conduct a roll call vote?
Assemblywoman Anderson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Black,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Brown May,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Carlton,
No.
Assemblywoman Cohen,
Yes.
Assemblyman Ellison,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Martinez,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Titus,
Yes.
Assemblyman Wheeler,
Yes.
Chair Watts.
Yes. Thank you, members. That motion carries. I will assign the floor statement to Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod with Assemblywoman Titus as a backup. Does that work, Assemblywoman?
That's the way it should be. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. And we will not be taking action on Assembly Bill 240 at this time. So with that, we will move on to the second item on our agenda for bill hearings today, which is Assembly Bill 399, which revises provisions governing the production and sale of eggs and egg products. And I will now turn the gavel over to my vice chair as I will be presenting this bill.
Thank you, Chair. Assembly Bill number 99 revises provisions governing the production and sale of eggs and egg products. And there is an amendment on Nellis. So please go ahead whenever you're ready, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Cohen and members of the committee. For the record, I am Howard Watts, representing Assembly District 15 in Clark County. I'm pleased to present Assembly Bill 399 for your consideration today. The bill ensures that eggs produced or sold in the state of Nevada meet certain standards of humane treatment for laying hens, often referred to as cage-free. Both egg producers and animal welfare advocates agree that this is the right thing to do. I do want to note that there is an amendment to the bill. We've been working on it up to very close before the meeting started, and it should be available on Nellis. With me to assist in the presentation of the bill today are several folks with the Humane Society of the United States, as well as some egg producers. So I'd just like to give some brief background. I myself tend a flock of 6 hens in my backyard. I haven't seen them in a little bit of time, but that experience has shown me how important it is for chickens to have good conditions for their well-being. It's critical for their physical and mental health that they have space to move, have appropriate nesting areas, scratching areas, the opportunity to dust bathe, and access to perches. When you go to the grocery store nowadays, you can probably find a wide variety of eggs that have different labels like free range or cage free on them. Those designations are regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And in those federal guidelines, eggs that are labeled that way have to be laid by hens that are held in spaces where they can roam free and have access to water, food, nesting, and perches. And that's how domestic chickens have been managed for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. But unfortunately, over recent decades, as we went in the direction of industrialization, we saw the emergence of a model that in the name of efficiency resulted in some pretty horrific conditions with hens in battery cages. For their entire lives, they are confined to a space with a floor that is smaller than a letter-sized paper. And for anyone who's seen a chicken, imagining one confined to a space that small is pretty difficult. More and more large food buyers, such as restaurants and grocery store chains, have pledged to use exclusively cage-free eggs. And that's in part because customers learning about this have demanded that their products be raised in a more humane fashion. State legislatures around the country have also taken up this issue. At least 7 states have passed legislation requiring only cage-free eggs to be produced and sold in their states. Those include Colorado, Massachusetts, Michigan, Oregon, Rhode Island, Utah, and Washington. California also passed a ballot initiative requiring the same thing. And last year, other states, including Arizona, Hawaii, and Maine, also considered these measures. And you'll notice if you look at that rundown that what we're seeing is, particularly in the West, a strong move in this direction. And I think it's important that we not have Nevada as an island without some of these same standards in place. We did have in 2020, 69 producer certificate holders in this state that produced 54,000 plus dozens of eggs that were intended for sale. And I believe that most of these egg producers currently use cage-free housing systems that meet these guidelines and already are in compliance with the provisions of this bill. To give a really simple overview, this bill requires that eggs sold, offered for sale, or transported for the purpose of selling within Nevada be produced in a cage-free housing system. It does this by having a farm owner or operator go through a cage-free certification from the State Department of Agriculture as part of the existing inspection certification process for these producers. The bill also prohibits a business owner or operator from selling, offering, or exposing for sale or transporting for sale eggs that the business owner or operator knows or should have known were not produced in a cage-free housing system. We do have an amendment. It mostly offers some technical fixes to streamline enforcement and inspection and give NDA some more flexibility. Among other things, the amendment also removes sections that trigger the 2/3 requirement on the bill, as these can be rolled into the existing processes for egg producers and does not require any additional fees. Now with that, I'd like to turn it over to my co-presenters to provide further background and details. And whoever wants to kick us off from my co-presenters, go ahead and take it away.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Warren Hardy, today representing the Humane Society of the United States. Thank you for that very thorough and accurate introduction, Mr. Chair. I have with me on the virtual dais, if you will, Jim Van Gorkum, who is he's Vice President of Sales for New Cal Foods, Jerry Wilkins, who's Sales Director for Rocky Mountain Eggs, and my colleague, Jeff Dixon, who is the State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. Madam Vice Chair, this is one of those happy occasions when the Humane Society oh, did I not start my video? I beg your pardon. I don't know what happened. This is probably better not to look at me anyway. This is one of those happy occasions when the industry, the egg producers, the marketplace has joined forces with HSUS on an initiative. And I'll let my colleagues from the industry speak for their motivation and their reasons going forward. But again, this is a dynamic that's taking place all over the country, particularly in the Western United States. And what our colleagues in the industry want is some certainty with the requirements for providing these eggs. I want to thank the chair for his interest in this issue and for his willingness to work with us. I want to be clear, this is a cage-free requirement, not a free-range requirement. I would direct your attention to Nellis, where there's a picture of the sort of the difference in what we're talking about. As the chair indicated, imagine in a caged environment, if you will, a hen which has to live in a enclosure the size of a piece of paper. If you look at the document or the picture that we provided, you'll see that this is really essentially requiring them to have 1 foot to 1.5 feet of space to be able to turn around, to be able to wash, to be able to stretch. So With that, Mr. Chair, I also really want to thank your committee counsel for the time that he's taken to work with us through these issues. And I want to particularly call out the efforts of Director Ott and the Department of Agriculture for their efforts in helping us get to this place on this bill. As you indicated, it should not require a 2/3 majority. We've made several changes in the amendment that address that issue and allow the Department of Agriculture to be able to enforce this and accommodate this in their regular course of business. So that's much of where that came from. I would also indicate that early afternoon today, I had conversations with Mr. Brian Walker at the Retail Association, who's leading a coalition, as I understand it, made up of the chambers, NFIB, and others who have some, I'm not even going to call them concerns. They have some questions about the effective date of this legislation, and I have committed to work with them. We don't have any issue with what they've brought up in terms of adjusting that date. We will be continuing to work with them, and hopefully before the amendments draft to be able to get some language to the committee that accommodates their concern. And I appreciate them working with us this afternoon. I know that's kind of late, Mr. Chairman, but that seems to be the pace of the session, or Madam Vice Chair. So if I may, Madam Vice Chair, if I could just sort of walk through at a 30,000 foot view level the sections of the bill, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Van Gorken, and then from there to Mr. Dixon, and then to Mr. Wilkins, and then we can open it up and answer any questions the committee might have, if that's acceptable.
Yeah.
So section 1 contains a legislative declaration, and I should indicate part of the reason for the amendment is this has been adopted, some version of this has been adopted by several states, even those near us, and so the language has to be pretty accurate in order to avoid any Commerce Clause challenges. In addition to that, as I've already indicated, it has to be pretty specific so that we can get the Department of Agriculture taken care of. And so one of those things that we wanted to provide in the bill is a legislative declaration that's contained in section 1. Section 2 through 15 contains the definitions for this purpose, because this is a new section of statute. And then section 16 is kind of where the rubber meets the road. And I would just back up again and specify that these definitions are crafted in a very special way to make sure we meet all the federal requirements, and also very clearly reflect the industry standards that are accepted. So section 16 deals with the production requirement. There's two portions of the bill. One deals with the production of cage-free eggs. The other section deals with the sale of cage-free eggs. So section 16 is the production portion, and it requires that in order to produce eggs, there has to be 1 square foot of space available for each hen if it is a multi-layered facility. These aviaries, many of them have multiple layers so that the hens can fly up to their nest, that they can move around to different levels. In scenarios where that is the case, the legislation requires 1 foot of space per hen. In instances where there is a single level, the requirement is 1.5 foot. Again, I would refer you to the picture that was provided on Nellis so you can kind of get a vision. But imagine, if you will, just a warehouse that's full of these hens that they can move around, they can interact, so they're not caged. I mean, this is really not a free range issue, because that's very, very different. Section 16, subsection 2 provides certain exemptions from the requirements of this bill that we've found through the years, or through the progress of this legislation in other states are necessary, such as medical research, transportation to and from fairs, certain applications for 4-H, and husbandry in certain applications. So that contains the exemptions that I think is important. Section 17 through 19 is the section that the chair referenced, that we worked with the Nevada Department of Agriculture to make sure that the requirements of this bill fit cleanly into their current practices, so they didn't have to hire new personnel. They didn't have to do anything beyond what they're doing now to be able to achieve it. And again, I want to thank Director Ott and her team for being so great to work with on this. And then Section 20, Madam Vice Chair, addresses the actual sale of the eggs. And with that, if I could turn it over to Jim Van Gorkum to give some background on why the industry believes this is an important piece of legislation, I'd appreciate that opportunity.
Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is
And I'll just
Jim.
remind you, please remember to just state your name every time you speak.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. My name is Jim Van Gorkum, Jimvan space Gorkom. I'm Vice President for New Cal Foods, which is an agricultural cooperative of family egg farmers. The families that I represent are all multi-generation farmers and have supplied fresh shell eggs to Nevada for decades from their farms in Utah and California. And I would certainly like to thank Chairman Watts, Vice Chairman Cohen, and the entire committee for your interest in this bill. Consumers, businesses, animal advocacy groups, and egg farmers all understand the importance of treating animals well. As egg farmers, we understand best that the health and well-being of our friends really is what keeps us in business and allows us to provide a healthy, high-quality, protein-packed food to our customers and the entire nation. And as the chairman said, within and around Nevada, consumers and businesses are choosing to purchase eggs from hens kept in cage-free environments. Consumer sentiment shows this very clearly, a strong support for it. Every year we see double-digit percentage increases in the sales of cage-free eggs. And as well as in Nevada, there's a great example right next door in California who passed a similar legislation in 2018. In Nevada, grocers and businesses such as Walmart, Smith's, Albertsons, Starbucks, McDonald's, it's a long list, MGM Resorts, Hilton Hotels, Caesars Entertainment, goes on and on, have committed to use only cage-free eggs as the minimum standard. Some now, some soon, some at slightly different dates, but it's all going to happen based on consumer demand and what our customers are telling us. So this trend towards cage-free eggs is driven in large part by the customer, but sometimes also helped pushed along by animal advocacy groups. So AB 399 is the result of really constructive dialogue and compromise between egg farmers and the country's largest animal advocacy group, the Humane Society of the United States. So by being part of this conversation, egg farmers have the opportunity to help create policy where our science-based production standards and our animal husbandry principles align with this growing demand for cage-free eggs. So what 399 does is continue to offer consumer choice. There are many different types of eggs available on your grocery store shelves and in restaurants. It provides a reasonable time period that allows farmers to convert or retrofit housing, and some of that's already underway today. It provides certainty for egg farmers as we look at a potential patchwork of similar yet slightly different requirements across the Western states. It offers an equal application of the law for any commercial egg producer business operating in the state. And it falls under the current procedures and practices of the Nevada Department of Agriculture. What it does not do, because it is limited to the commercial egg laying industry, it does not affect other animal species. There's no encroachment on interstate commerce because of this equal application, and it does not remove consumer choice. There will still be cage-free and organic and free-range and pasture-raised and nutritionally enhanced and brown eggs and white eggs. Those will all still be offered. So the egg industry is shifting towards cage-free operations to meet the demands of Nevadans, other Western states, our customers, and much of the nation. This legislation brings Nevada into alignment with where the marketplace is going. It also aligns Nevada with states throughout the region that already have nearly identical standards in place. And those include, again, California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Utah. There's other Southwest states today that are looking at this issue. And with these nearby states enacting similar requirements, it's important that we have consistency on a regional basis rather than be forced to comply with multiple standards across state lines. Also, it's really important that the cage-free requirements being proposed in this bill are standards that the egg industry has endorsed as best practices to produce cage-free eggs. These methods are the best of science and animal care, where we can meet the shared goals of giving hens the ability to exhibit natural behaviors and also meet the economic viability of large-scale egg production. So we believe passage of AB 399 in Nevada will help provide clarity and certainty for these nearby farms that supply eggs to Nevada. It addresses the valid concern for the humane treatment of animals, and it's responsive to the marketplace and this desire for cage-free eggs. So committee members, the egg farmers of our agricultural cooperative believe that this is good for egg farmers, animal agriculture, and Nevadans, and support AB 399. And we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Van Gorken.
Go ahead, Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, I am Jeff Dixon. I'm the Nevada State Director for the Humane Society of the United States, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of AB 399. In a political climate where it sometimes seems impossible for stakeholders to come together in thoughtful, constructive dialogue, this bill is a welcome reprieve. AB 399 is the result of Nevada's egg suppliers and humane advocates coming together for a more economically viable and humane future. This legislation is a testament to stakeholders listening, providing insights, and finding common ground for the betterment of farmers and animals alike. In particular, we at HSUS would like to thank Jerry Wilkins, Jim Van Gorkum, and the other egg suppliers who you will hear from soon for being such terrific partners in this effort. Millions of egg-laying chickens in the U.S. are confined in cages that the industry terms battery cages. In those cages, each chicken is provided roughly 67 square inches of floor space to live her entire life. That is smaller than the dimensions of a sheet of paper. AB 399 will get egg-laying chickens out of barren wire cages and into cage-free systems, improving their lives by providing freedom of movement. It requires key enrichments for the birds, including perches, dust bathing and nesting in scratching areas, and nest boxes. To egg suppliers' credit, due to public concern for animal welfare, food companies' demand for cage-free products, and legislative momentum around the U.S., which has been mentioned by previous presenters, they believe that the future of the egg industry is cage-free, and we agree. Egg producers say that regulatory certainty with cage-free standards they already know how to follow provides security for their business, and we agree. Egg producers say that can't happen overnight, and a reasonable time frame is needed to make the switch to cage-free, and we agree. In short, this bill ushers in a thriving, cage-free future for farmers using a standard crafted by the egg industry according to a timeline that is economically viable. It closely mirrors laws that were also supported by egg suppliers in Utah, Oregon, Washington, Massachusetts, Colorado, California, and Michigan. Several other states have egg supplier endorsed bills pending this year. More than 200 of the world's top grocery, fast food, and restaurant companies are switching to 100% cage-free eggs. Among the grocery, Walmart, Albertsons, Kroger's, Raley's, Safeway, Dollar Tree, and Dollar General. Among the restaurant chains are Denny's, McDonald's, Arby's, and Taco Bell. What these brands may have in common, as you may have noticed, is that they are preferred by cost-conscious consumers. And finally, the cage-free standard in this bill also promotes food safety because it reduces the risk for zoonotic disease transmission by providing requirements of a minimum stocking density, as well as nest boxes for hens to lay their eggs, so their eggs aren't laid on the ground, which increases safety risks. So with that, thank you for considering this farmer and animal-friendly legislation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Mr. Dixon, I know you said you're ready for questions. Are there any, is there anyone else in the presentation?
Sorry, Jerry Wilkins.
Wilkins, yes.
Please go.
Hey, good afternoon, Vice Chair Cohen and committee members. My name is Jerry Wilkins, and I'm the Sales and Marketing Director for Morning Fresh Farms, a Colorado family-owned commercial egg farm. We produce farm fresh eggs that are distributed throughout the western United States, and this includes Nevada. I would like to thank Chairman Watts for sponsoring AB 399. His leadership in helping us find common ground is sincerely appreciated. Committee, you may ask why so-called out-of-state interests are supporting this bill. To be clear, there are no commercial egg producers in the state, so Nevada businesses must source eggs from many regional farms, such as our farm, Morning Fresh Farms. In many ways, we are your local egg supplier and have a vested interest in making sure Nevadans can continue to enjoy farm fresh eggs from the area that are humane, safe, and affordable. Over 200 grocers, as folks before me had mentioned, grocers and food companies, many of which are doing business in Nevada today, such as Target, Sam's Club, Dollar Tree, Subway, and more, are requiring cage-free eggs from egg suppliers either now or over the next few years. Moreover, Nevada consumers are demanding cage-free. Just 5 years ago, cage-free production was only 6%. Today, cage-free is nearly 30% of all eggs produced in the US, and that number is growing fast. Although our family farm believes in free markets, there are multiple reasons why AB 399 is necessary as cage-free becomes the norm. Here are a couple of them. To create a more stable egg supply, this legislation creates one statewide standard. In fact, this will help create a level playing field with one regionalized standard for undisrupted interstate commerce in the Southwest, keeping production and distribution costs in line and eggs affordable. It takes millions of dollars to convert to cage-free. With a clear timeline towards standardized regulatory framework set now, producers can confidently make capital investments in the right housing systems for their operation. The cage-free standards laid out in this bill are the industry's own science-based, peer-reviewed best practices, and these standards will ensure the hens have the ability to perform their natural behaviors, including roaming, perching, scratching, and nesting in a controlled environment. This is not the more extreme standards such as a free range or a pasture raised, which are very expensive to produce and can expose the birds to disease and predators. The state-of-the-art cage-free housing of today is not the setup that great-grandpa had. Commercially produced cage-free eggs are safe. Eggs will not be laid on the ground, but in private nest boxes and conveyed to a processing area to be cleaned, sanitized, and packaged. Through advancements in lighting technology, our cage-free hens are not skittish or aggressive, but content and docile. Through quality ventilation systems, clean, fresh air is always available in a cage-free house. Because of this, dust levels are no greater than in a caged environment. This is important for both worker and bird health. Ultimately, consumers will still have a choice in the eggs they buy and serve their families, with continued access to a variety of egg types, sizes, colors, and packs. In conclusion, this bill offers a balance between prudent, science-based animal husbandry standards and the cost-effective commercial production and sale of fresh eggs in Nevada. This is why our family farm supports AB 399 and respectfully ask the Natural Resources Committee for the same consideration. Thank you, Vice Chairwoman Cohen and committee.
Thank you very much. So I think that's it for our presentation. That's correct. Are you ready to go on to questions?
We're ready to go for questions. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So I have a question to start with. So the section 1 refers to the legislature's authority to protect health and welfare of consumers and promote food safety. So can you please explain that to me? Like why is this better for people and better as far as food safety?
If I may, Madam Vice Chair, if I could refer that to Jerry Wilkins.
Thank you, Madam Vice
Chair. And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't mean to interrupt. If you wanted to address that, I just.
Sure. I will. This is Howard Watts for the record. Thank you, and I appreciate Mr. Hardy's assistance in helping direct questions to some of our expert panel as well. Yeah, and I think I'll leave it to the experts to provide the details. But as someone who's tended chickens and worked hands-on with animals a little bit, I will say a couple of big picture things. One, you never want to eat something from an animal that isn't healthy. That's just something to. For folks that haven't worked hands-on with animals, that's a key principle. And when chickens are confined in these situations, it is unhealthy. And so then as conditions develop, they have to be treated, sometimes with other medications, and that has impacts as well. So I'll let the experts speak to the details about the actual quality of the product, but it certainly leads to healthier livestock, which leads to a healthier product. And I believe a healthier product means healthier people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to add something?
I apologize. This is Jerry Wilkins, Madam Vice Chair, if I may. Chairman Watts really hit the nail on the head there. With this set of standards, what ensures the food safety is the fact that it ensures stocking density is in place, that we're not, I don't want to use the term cramming chickens in cage-free barns, cage-free facilities with no regard to the space per bird. So if you cram birds into tight spaces, it affects their stress levels, which can affect their outflow, and it can promote unsafe standards for the eggs they produce. So stocking density, as well as the fact that these standards also require nest boxes. The birds will actually privately lay their eggs in these nest boxes, and those eggs will actually be conveyed out to the end of the barn and then conveyed down to the processing area. So at no time is that egg actually come in contact with feces or other foreign debris that can cause foodborne illness, those type of things. So the standards set forth in this, because they are industry standards, they truly do put food safety first, as well as the bird health, to ensure that we protect the birds as well as the humans consuming those eggs as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkins. Was there anyone else who wanted to add anything to that answer? No? Okay. Also, I have another question. So we've, as someone who isn't involved in this field at all, I think I've heard about the birds having like beaks removed and things like that. Is that going to be an issue here, or is that not addressed at all?
Madam Vice Chair, if I may, this is Jerry Wilkins again. In regards to beak trimming today is actually a common practice amongst commercial egg producers. No matter if it's a caged or conventional system, a cage-free, organic, etc., beak trimming is a standard today, and it will be a standard in the future, even under the cage-free standards that we've set forth. Now, with that said, the industry continues to look for other ways of finding ways of not having to beak trim, but at this point, to reduce the potential for pecking, aggressive behaviors, those type of things. The beak trimming actually protects the birds versus non-beak trimming. And as long as you are following the industry standards, which are set forth by the United Egg Producers, that actually mandate or regulate how early in a hen's life, or the pullet, if you will, a bird that's between 1 and 20 weeks of age is a brooder or a pullet, they are required to beak trim within the first few days of that hen's life. And so because of that, the beak is more pliable, and the pain that the bird endures is actually much less, similar to trimming the nails of a dog or a cat at that age. And so so beak trimming is essential today, and it will remain until the industry finds another avenue for reducing feather pecking in that case.
Thank you. And then, and I should have also been more clear about, besides the beak, is there anything else that's trimmed or removed?
Madam Vice Chair, no, there is not.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Assemblyman Wheeler.
Hey, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I appreciate it. And I just wanted to say that, you know, even though my friend Mr. Hardy was a bit plucky, it was overall an excellent presentation. But I do have a question now that we've gotten that out of the way. And I think Mr. Wilkins could probably answer this for me. I remember seeing an egg producing plant years ago in Arkansas, and they were very proud of the automation, you know, as the eggs would roll down a conveyor belt. Basically, the food was all done automated, et cetera. Very labor intensive. But these were caged animals back then. And so I'm wondering, what will the pricing difference be if Nevada, for instance, were to go completely to cage free? Is that a raise in price, or would it be comparatively the same?
Madam Vice Chair, if you don't mind me answering Assemblyman Wheeler's question.
Please, and feel free to go direct.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Assemblyman Wheeler, excellent question. That is a question that we should all ask. What is the cost going to look like when this bill passes? Let's just say 20 years ago, this would not have been economically feasible. The industry was not in a position to be able to produce eggs in a cage-free environment with efficiencies and economies of scale. In fact, the capital or the equipment that we had 20 years ago wouldn't have sustained the need to feed 325 million Americans using cage-free production. Today, because of efficiencies in production, equipment, utilization, and diet, having a bird in a cage-free environment is actually affordable. It's cost-effective. You would probably we anticipate just based on some production differences, about a few cents per egg difference from what today's caged egg is. Now, a lot of folks will say, well, I was just at the store today and I found a specialty egg or a cage-free egg that was $4.29 a dozen. How are you going to tell me that eggs are not going to be that much more expensive than today's caged eggs when this bill passes? Today, that has some pretty aggressive markups, if you will. The retailer puts those into their added value category within the egg case, what we call designer eggs or specialty eggs. As cage-free becomes the norm, it becomes the commodity. When an egg or any product becomes commoditized, what do? It becomes the value product or the affordable product that's on the shelf. Retailers will use it as what we call the loss leader to drive traffic into the stores. And what we'll see is just a nominal difference in the cost of eggs versus what they are today. In fact, however, with understanding that over 200 of these food companies, including most of the retailers we know today in the greater Nevada area, are going to cage-free, these standards will actually keep those cage-free eggs in affordable instead of multiple different standards, Assemblyman. We're going to have one set of standards, which is going to keep those cage-free eggs affordable to the consumers there in Nevada.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, if I might just add that to Mr. Wheeler, that was a very good dad yoke.
Madam Chair, this is Jim Van Gorkum. With your permission, I'd like to add on a little additional information for Assemblyman Wheeler.
Please go ahead, Mr. Van Gorkum.
Jim Van Gorkum for the record. Thank you, Assembly Member. That is a great question, and we all need to be cognizant of that potential impact. I'd like to answer your question in a couple different ways. Mr. Wilkins mentioned, specialty eggs, call them a premium egg. as kind of a generic description, which could be pasture raised or organic. And today that includes cage free. The majority of eggs sold, though, the quote unquote regular eggs, are primarily a commodity product. A large portion of the cost to produce an egg is the feed, corn and soybean meal, and those are commodities. So the cost of these eggs changes throughout the year as a commodity based on supply and demand. Eggs, though, are a very competitive category, both at the wholesale level and at retail. Earlier this afternoon, as I do every Wednesday, I received a recap of all of the retailer ads throughout the Western US and what eggs were in them. And let me just briefly share this with you because I think you'll find it interesting. If you live in Southern Nevada, you could go in today to Albertsons, Vaughn's, Smith's, Spartan Final, La Bonita, or Mariana's, and you'd find eggs on sale in every one of those stores. If you lived in Reno, Carson City, you could go into Raley's, Safeway, Save Mart, or Smith's, and again, you'd find eggs on sale. As cage-free eggs become the commodity, the regular everyday egg, there's going to be tremendous pressure at the wholesale level and at the retail level to be competitive, to offer the best possible price. Another quick analogy, well, and before that, even a question. I mentioned several retailers. None of those people want their shoppers harmed. They don't want their shoppers to pay more for eggs. But my last point, Madam Vice Chair, with your permission, California has been going through this process, this change process for years. It started in 2015 with a requirement that the hens have more space. In 2020, more space was required. And in 2022, it'll be cage-free. The majority of these everyday regular eggs sold in California today are already cage-free. But if you looked at the prices in California of regular eggs today versus 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you would have a hard time finding a difference. So while it certainly costs a significant amount of investment to have cage-free production, the improvements and advances that we're making in technology and in labor processes and practices, and just the competitive nature of this business will continue to provide a great value to Nevada residents. And thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. Van Gorken. I appreciate your answer.
Thank you, and I appreciate the information. I am going to ask the speakers to try to be brief as we are coming up against a deadline in the next couple of days. So we want to make sure and get through everything. I do have a question from Assemblywoman Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question just actually related to the bill itself. So looking at the bill, and I'm looking at Section 8, there's this statement that says this pertains to farm owner or operator, which means a person who owns a farm or controls operations of a farm. There's no statement anywhere that I can see on the size of what the farm would affect. I reached out to some of my local, and I live in rural Nevada, and buy local eggs that are produced by a small little farm that has 200 hens. These hens are loved on and they are let out during the day in a large pen if there's predators around, because they've just recently had to kill a mountain lion that lives literally in their barn. So when it's safe, they let them out. And then otherwise at night, they put them in two separate pens where they have little nesting boxes. So would this pertain to them? What's the definition of a farm and the size of acreage and the number of eggs or chickens?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Assemblywoman, for that answer. So the definition of a business owner or operator is contained in Section 2. We looked at that issue and actually had legislators prior to session, as we were talking about this, ask about that. And by definition, those are really free range chickens. So none of this would limit what they're doing in any way, shape.
So what? Thank you, Assemblyman Hardy or Mr. Hardy. At what point, however, does it get to be they sell everything? You know, they're the ones that we go to for our pumpkins. They're the ones we go to for our squash. They do all of it, and they barely make it. And so, you know, will they have to get a certificate? And that was my question back to number on section, back to the bill itself, section 14, they have to get the certificate and be surveyed and inspected. Will they have to go through that and an inspection every year because they do sell eggs?
I'll get that really briefly. Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Titus. Howard Watts for the record. Again, this isn't actually changing the requirements of who has to get certified and inspected for eggs. So if you have a producer that already falls within that and is subject to those provisions and goes through those processes with the Department of Agriculture, we're just layering on top of that to make sure that they're using a cage-free system. This is not going to put additional requirements on anybody else. So if for whatever reason they're not, as somebody who has 6 chickens in my backyard, I am not going to be subject to those provisions, even though I do have a setup that would qualify as cage-free, and most of those small producers would as well. So just to be absolutely clear for the record, this isn't going to expand the group of the size or qualifications for producers. It's just layering an additional level on top of those that are already managed by our Department of Agriculture.
That's my next question. Thank you, Assemblyman Watts, for that, Chair Watts. The next question is, how does the Department of Agriculture have the capacity to go out and inspect these? Or in what I'm hearing from one of your presenters, there's no such entity already in our state, and most of these are already imported. Is that correct? Can the Department of Ag do what you're asking them to do?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Titus. Howard Watts for the record. Again, we have some producers here in the state, and they that are already subject to oversight by the State Department of Agriculture. And so this is just integrating this into that procedure. And again, most of those producers already are at this standard. So this is just codifying it, making sure that best practice is established for everyone and there's a level playing field. Additionally, so the department already has staffing structure and has indicated that integrating this in would not create an additional burden on the agency. And in addition, as if needed within existing language, the department could use private inspection assistance if they ever needed to, and that's already laid out. Now, Mr. Hardy, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, that was well done, Mr. Chair. I would only add, Dr. Titus, that the on the ground impact of this is that out of state sellers would have to get the certification referenced in the legislation. This would have no significant impact whatsoever, no impact whatsoever on, they're already under the jurisdiction of Department of Agriculture and the smaller ones that you referenced. So the net effect of this would be the out-of-state producers that are bringing eggs in would need to certify that they're cage-free. We're unaware of any that wouldn't qualify as cage-free. And the purpose for the amendment that we worked with Department of Ag with was to make sure there wouldn't be any additional requirements that they couldn't fit within their current practice.
Thank you for that. And just follow up on that, Madam Vice Chair, that line of questioning. So does that mean that our Department of Ag is now have to go to Colorado and inspect them, and they'll have to have a separate certificate to bring their eggs into here, and that they'll have to now go to California and inspect them and give them that certificate once a year, so that now they're going to have a special certificate from the state of Nevada in addition to additional fees from the state of Nevada? And do they have a capacity for that?
So if I may, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, so the onus is already on the, or would be on the business to get the certification. So it wouldn't require that there's any visits or anything from the Department of Ag. It's just a certification process that they're certifying their eggs are cage-free.
So are there other, like I know when you have a certified organic, I know that we don't have the capacity in our Department of Ag to certify perhaps a crop that's organic. So they actually have other companies that can give a certificate that it's organic, and the company then pays for that. Is that similar to what this would be, that somebody else would certify The
You know
need,
what? You just got over my pay scale, Dr. Titus, so maybe I could refer that to Mr. Van Gorkum or Mr. Sorry, to one of my colleagues, Mr. Wilkins. Sorry, Mr. Wilkins, if they are able to address how that is happening in practice now in other states.
Madam Vice Chair, may I proceed?
Please go ahead and I'm sorry, we do just need to be really, really brief because we are up against another committees.
Right, Jim Van Gorkum for the record. There are private party certifiers, there are third parties, there are process verification organizations, all of which already exist across the country, do regular visits and audits of farms, and those certifications could be supplied to the Nevada Department of Agriculture to be qualified to sell the product within Nevada.
thank you. And I don't know if we need clarifying language on that or not, but thank you for that answer. And thank you, Madam Vice Chair, for the questions.
Madam Chair, there is specific language in that to provide for that. So I'd be happy to point that out offline. I know we're in a hurry, but we specifically provide for that in the bill.
Okay, thank you for that. And with that, I have a question from Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. I know we're going long here, so I'll try not to take up much time. I get this concept. I try to live it, and I think that education is what got me to be a consumer of cage-free eggs. I've been doing that for lots of years now. We've raised our own chickens when we had them when the kids were at home, cage-free. Our pigs roamed for 4-H and ate the apples off the ground. And my cats are not declawed, Mr. Dixon. But that being said, while I get the intent, and we're all horrified when we learn from these documentaries we see and the education we get on how animals are treated, it sounds like it is consumer driven, that we really are getting there. Yet you mentioned, several of you mentioned in your testimony that, you know, the consumer demand in Nevada sounds to be pretty good, that restaurants, several stores. I know in my experience over the last 40 years of grocery shopping, I have seen quite the transition. There still is a price disparity. And I do worry about the cost for, we do a lot of talk in this building about food insecurity, about those living at the poverty level or below. And so if I'm understanding it right, there's no production in Nevada. We import all of our eggs. And if this bill were to pass, only cage-free eggs would be allowed to be sold in Nevada. Is that correct? I see Mr. Van Gorkum nodding his head, and we're short on time. So I thought that was the answer. I just wanted to make sure. So I just think that the education should continue. I got a little bit of a worldview issue with the idea of forcing it when the market tends to be trending that way. And then perhaps this is the question. If this is a practice that is so disturbing, and I think it is, do we not address it through the federal level with USDA? I think that's their jurisdiction, that if there are these kinds of producers going on in the United States, isn't it better to go after it that way than close off our border and choice when it's being allowed in other places?
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, I'd let Mr. Van Gorkum address that, but I would just argue that part of the reason that the industry expressed to us to have this is so that they have some certainty. I think you could argue that the prices will go up without this kind of certainty because they'll be having to deal with different regulations in different states. That's part of their motivation here, is so they can develop a business model for this, since that is where the market's headed. I think it's always better on these kinds of things if we can do federal legislation, but in lieu of that, they're trying to create a certainty that they can build a business model around that can more economically provide these. But I know we're out of time, but Mr. Van Gorkum, if he has anything to add to that, it'd be.
Madam Vice Chair and Assemblymember Hanson, in an effort to be very brief, we're looking for consistency on a regional basis. That consistency will allow us to be more efficient. It will allow us to get the funding we need to continue expansion. So rather than deal with the US, we want to get Nevada aligned with what's going on in your neighboring states and to have a consistency in this region, which will bring down costs and keep them lower.
Thank you for that answer. And so I think what I'm going to do is, because we do have to get moving, I'm going to ask anyone else to have questions to ask them offline, and especially thank Assemblyman Ellison, who I skipped over and has now lost his space for a question. And are we ready for support? Chair?
Yep, I believe we can go on to
Great.
testimony.
And do we have anyone on the Zoom in support, or is it all telephonic?
We don't have any additional, we just have our co-presenters, so we can go on to the phones now.
Okay, and then we're going to go 20 minutes in support, 20 minutes in opposition, and 20 minutes in neutral. And we will time for 2 minutes per person. And with that, BPS, please get us the first person who's in support on the phones.
Thank you, Vice Chair. To testify in support on AB 399, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits 718. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Anthony Demler, ANTHONYDEMLER. My brother and I run Demler Brothers Egg Ranch in Ramona, California. I'm a third-generation farmer in the poultry business. My grandfather and father started the farm that I work at today over 45 years ago. I'm calling in to voice my support for Assembly Bill 399. First, I would like to thank Chairman Watts for sponsoring this bill. As egg farmers, the health of our hens is the most important thing to us. Running an egg farm goes far beyond just that, though. Over the past 5 years or so, we have invested significantly in upgrading our farm, including adding cage-free production. Our customers want cage-free eggs, and we want to be responsive to that trend, which can also be seen across the United States. The cage-free requirements proposed in this bill are standards the egg industry adopted in 2017. These best practices for cage-free egg production were developed by an independent group of animal scientists, which allow the hens to exhibit natural behaviors while keeping them protected from predatory animals and inclement weather. This bill provides the clarity and certainty that we need as egg farmers to plan our future, to obtain financing, building permits, etc., so that we can continue supplying fresh, high-quality eggs for generations to come. It also helps immensely towards having one standard in the Western United States, as several other Southwest states have already passed similar legislation. We believe that AB 399 is good for the egg industry and Nevada, and ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next person in support, please.
For the callers that have joined recently, we are in support on AB 399. If you would like to take your place in the queue, please press *9 now. Caller with the last 3 digits 754. Please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record, and you may begin.
Hello, this is Marie Camino with Mercy for Animals, MarieCamino. Thank you, Chair Watts, for sponsoring this bill. And dear Vice Chair Cohen and esteemed members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to comment in support of AB 399. Mercy for Animals is a nonprofit organization with approximately 2,000 Nevada-based supporters dedicated to creating a more compassionate food system. Here I will outline how AB 399 protects animal welfare and consumers. In terms of animal welfare, AB 399 would be one of the most comprehensive farm animal protection initiatives to date by ensuring that egg-laying hens have space to exhibit natural behaviors such as walking, dust bathing, perching, and nesting. All animals deserve space to exhibit natural behaviors. As Chair Watts mentioned previously, Nevada would join states like California, Washington, Michigan, Colorado, and Massachusetts in creating a more compassionate food system for egg-laying hens should this bill pass. Another point on food safety, confining egg-laying hens in cages puts Nevadans at risk. More than a dozen studies have found that salmonella is actually more prevalent in cage egg production than in cage-free, increasing the risk of disease. Mercy for Animals supports this important step forward in animal welfare, public health, and family farming. Thank you for considering our comments.
Thank you. Next person in support, please.
Vice Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. Then can we please go to opposition on the phones?
To testify in opposition on AB 399, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits 349, please press *6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
For the record, my name is Doug Busselman, D-O-U-G-B-U-S-S-E-L-M-A-N. I'm the Executive Vice President of Nevada Farm Bureau. We are testifying today in opposition to AB 399. We believe that government has a proper role in food safety matters and oversight in making certain that the foods we eat are safe. We believe that government has a proper role in maintaining standards to make certain that animals are not mistreated or abused in the state where they are kept. We believe that animal health standards fit within the appropriate jurisdiction of federal and state agencies who have authority for such responsibilities. With these foundations pointed out, we come to AB 399. We do not believe that it is appropriate for the Nevada Department of Agriculture to be assigned a role in checking the paperwork on whether eggs or egg products sold in Nevada have come from birds in other states with designated management requirements that rightfully belong under the state authority where the birds live. As far as site regulations in Nevada, we aren't aware that Nevada Department of Agriculture has an inspection program for this purpose. Will we need new regulations? As a general farm organization, Nevada Farm Bureau members are involved in the production of different food and fibers. We have members in Nevada who do sell poultry and eggs. We haven't gone door to door or searched in people's backyards to measure how much space their chickens might have. Given the already intrusive level of government, we don't believe that these types of investigations would properly fit into the scope of the work that Nevada government should be going through either. Given the market forces that we've been hearing about, why do we need government to force the only choice to be what is required by this bill? Private sector vendors of eggs or egg products have a system for third-party verification that provides for being able to label the eggs that they sell coming from cage-free or not. If that
Mr.
type of
Busselman, I'm
marketing
sorry, but you're at
advantage-
2 minutes, so can you wrap it up, please?
We are opposed to AB 399, and thank you.
Thank you. Next person in support, please. Sorry, opposition, please. Next person in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits 046, please slowly state and spell your name for the record, and you may begin.
Martin Paris, M-A-R-T-I-N-P-A-R-I-S. Chairman and members of the committee, again, this is Martin Paris. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Cattlemen's Association. While Nevada Cattlemen's Association does not represent any commercial poultry producers, we felt that it was important to go on record in opposition of AB 399. While we are unaware of the existence of any commercial poultry operations in Nevada, this bill would effectively ban the in-state sale of eggs in Nevada from quote-unquote caged birds from out of state. The bill's market mandate is a huge concern and should be a major concern to direct stakeholders, i.e. the consumer. We believe that the effort to place this proposal in statute is overreaching and unnecessary, especially considering voluntary measures already agreed through various corporate policies. Logically, we are also led to believe that the next step is legislation extending authority on how we produce pork, dairy, beef, etc. in Nevada. We ask that the market and consumers' choice dictate what items are put on the shelf, and are concerned that policies like this set a precedent for advocacy groups to use the law to force retailers to carry their type of product. With that said, the Nevada Cattlemen's Association respectfully asks the committee not to pass AB 399. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next person in opposition.
Vice Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. And I don't believe there's anyone on the Zoom, so we will go to neutral. Do we have anyone in the Zoom on neutral? Okay, just checking. Please go ahead.
I apologize. To testify in neutral on AB 399, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits 496. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Alexandria Dazlich, D-A-Z-L-I-C-H, and I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Nevada Restaurant Association. The Nevada Restaurant Association is here today in neutral to AB 399 with amendments. We appreciate the intent behind the bill and understand that the industry is moving in the direction of greater access to cage-free eggs. However, we ask that the transition would be initiated in a reasonable amount of time. As you're aware, the restaurant industry has been greatly devastated by the pandemic and will need time to recover as we continue to operate at half capacity. Instituting this level of change in the distribution and supply of a staple food on such a short timeline will likely have negative effects on many of our operators. We appreciate the bill sponsors' openness to amending the bill and look forward to working with all the stakeholders involved to find a workable solution. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next person in neutral, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits 700. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record, and you may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Brian Wachter, B-R-Y-A-N. W-A-C-H-T-E-R. I serve as the Senior Vice President of the Retail Association of Nevada. I would join Ms. Dajla's comments that we too are in neutral. We do apologize for the scheduling, but we do believe that this is the direction that the industry is going. But we do have concerns over the implementation period. Colorado has been mentioned several times during the presentation, and their ban does not go into effect until 2025. So we would be looking for language that most closely aligns with that consistent framework that the supporters are looking for. So we appreciate the sponsor bringing this to Nevada, and we appreciate the ability to work on this as it continues to move.
Thank you. Next person in opposition.
Caller with the last 3 digits 232. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record, and you may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, David Dazlich, D-A-Z-L-I-C-H, Director of Government Affairs for the Vegas Chamber. We are in neutral today on AB 399. We do, however, share the concerns voiced by the Restaurant Association, the Retail Association, and others. Our position in neutral today is based off the proposed amendment recommended by the Retail and Restaurant Associations to allow for greater timelines for implementation and greater flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you. And and before we go on to the next caller, I'll just remind the stakeholders to please reach out to the sponsor with any proposals. Next person in neutral, please.
Vice Chair, there are no more callers in neutral.
Thank you. With that, we will go back to Chair if you'd like to make any closing statements.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair. I know we're we're over time here, and appreciate everyone's time, attention, and questions to this. I just want to reiterate that this is something that's being brought forward in conjunction between the industry and animal welfare advocates. It's something that we can accomplish without increasing prices, but we can improve the health, the reputation, the health of the animals, the quality of the product, the reputation of the producers. I think it's a win-win. I appreciate the comments made by those who came in neutral. I've only just learned about their issues right before the meeting, and I'm glad to work with them to adjust the implementation timeline as soon as they provide a proposal to me. And with that, I appreciate the committee's time and attention, and urge your support for Assembly Bill 399.
Thank you very much. With that, I will close the hearing on AB 399 and pass the virtual gavel back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members. That leaves only one other item left on our agenda today, and that is public comment. As a reminder, to provide public comment, you must register in advance on the legislative website. Please limit your remarks to 2 minutes and start by stating and spelling your name clearly for the record. With that, we'll go back to Broadcast Production Services to see if anyone is wishing to provide or public comment.
To provide public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working, but it seems that there are no callers at this time.
All right, thank you. Thank you again, members. Thank you to everyone who joined us, including public and others who took time to provide their comments during this meeting. Thank you again to members for all the time that you took, and to BPS staff for helping facilitate everything. That concludes today's meeting. Our next meeting will be on Friday, the 9th, upon the adjournment of Commerce and Labor. And as folks who have done this before know, once we have the folks together, we'll get together and we'll work session the last of the bills that we have on deck. So thank you all for your work so far. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.